our goal is to get naloxone into every medicine cabinet, into every first aid kit, every household, and in every purse, in every place of business, so that we can save lives.
PodcastRx.
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 Welcome to PodcastRx from Diamond Pharmacy, a show featuring the pharmacists and personnel behind the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. While we talk primarily about clinical and regulatory topics affecting the institutional healthcare clients we serve, we'll also occasionally get into the stories behind the people moving our company forward. This isn't just a pharmacy podcast, and you don't have to be a clinician or a pharmacist to enjoy it. In November of 2023, Diamond's sister company InnovaScript became the official pharmacy partner to the Victoria's Voice Foundation, a nonprofit drug education and addiction prevention support organization founded in memory of Victoria Siegel, a young woman who tragically lost her life to an accidental drug overdose. At the heart of this new partnership is the Get Give Save campaign, a national effort to increase the access to and the awareness of naloxone. On this episode, we welcome Mark Cady-Archilla, Corporate Partnerships Director for the Victoria's Voice Foundation, Jason Baker, Director of Strategic Initiatives for Diamond, and Chris Bender, Pharmacist with Diamond's Optics team, for a deeper discussion of this partnership and what it's doing to put naloxone in more life-saving locations. Along the way, Mark gives us a greater introduction to the Victoria's Voice Foundation and shares his deeply personal connection to the foundation's work. We recap the efficacy and life-saving simplicity of naloxone, and we discuss the obstacles of naloxone stigma and access, among many other areas of discussion. It's a longer conversation, but there's no shortage of powerful moments to be heard. This is PodcastRx, and I'm Adam Campbell. It's a special occasion for PodcastRx today as we welcome our first guest from outside the Diamond Drugs family. It's a great pleasure to introduce Mark Cady-Archilla, Director of Corporate Partnerships for the Victoria's Voice Foundation. Mark, how are you today?
I am very well, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. So good to meet you. So good to have you on the show to talk about the very important work that you all do at Victoria's Voice.
Thank you very much.
It's equally great pleasure to welcome to the podcast, also for the first time, Mr. Jason Baker, longtime corrections account executive and now Director of Strategic Partnerships for Diamond. Jason, good to see you. Well, not seeing you. Good to hear from you and glad to have you aboard. How's your day going so far?
It's busy, Adam, but I very much appreciate that warm introduction and always a pleasure to get to chat with you and Mark and Chris as well. So thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. And rounding out this triumvirate, my go-to clinical pharmacist, my favorite guest from the PodcastRx show. I shouldn't say that out loud, but we've had a lot of conversations. Chris Bender from Diamond's Optics team. Chris, thank you kindly as always for lending your time and expertise to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Adam. Don't worry, I won't tell anybody. It's a pleasure to be here as always, and I think it's really fun that we're on here with multiple people this time. So it's nice to share the love.
Definitely. We don't do the multiple guests a lot on here, so this is a lot of fun. But
awesome.
We'll get right into why we're here today. So in November of 2023, Diamond Drugs' subsidiary company, InnovaScript, which for those that don't know is the retail mail order pharmacy division of the Diamond Drugs family, became the official pharmacy partner of the Victoria's Voice Foundation, which is a nonprofit founded in memory of Victoria Siegel, a young woman who tragically lost her life to an overdose in 2015. Victoria's Voice is devoted to improving access to naloxone and opioid reversal medications, and that's just one part of what they do, to avert tragedies like Victoria's from happening again. And InnovaScript is helping them to make this access to naloxone easier by supplying naloxone to purchase for the home or workplace. So I wanted to have you gentlemen on the show today to not only talk more about the partnership between Innova and Victoria's Voice, but also to talk more about naloxone, its life-saving promise, and what ultimately Innova and the Victoria's Voice Foundation are doing to get it in more hands. So Mark, if I could start with you, can you give us an introduction to the Victoria's Voice Foundation, the history, the mission, and how you became involved with the organization?
Certainly. It's my pleasure. And again, it's great to be here with everyone. So Victoria's Voice is a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit, and we provide evidence-based drug education and addiction prevention support for families. We were founded by David and Jackie Siegel after their daughter, Victoria, as you mentioned earlier, at the age of 18, died of an accidental drug overdose. The Siegels, some of you may be familiar with Westgate Resorts. David and Jackie Siegel are the owners of Westgate Resorts. They are determined to help spare other parents the pain and grief that they experience. So after Victoria's death, David came into his senior executives and he said, "You guys, I'm going to turn over the operations of the company to you, and I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to helping to avert families from having to go through such thing that we did." So to date, as I mentioned earlier before we got started, we have now impacted over 1 million kids and parents through our education programs. That's just since 2019. And that occurred just a couple of weeks ago in Nashville, Tennessee. So we were very excited to reach that major milestone. Our mission at Victoria's Voice is really to advance initiatives, achieve policy changes, amplify education, assure critical resources, and applaud like-minded organizations to address drug abuse in order to save lives. So, we're not engaged directly with government affairs and things like that, but we do support organizations that do. I became involved. In fact, this is my 1-year anniversary week with being the Victoria's Voice.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Made it. I made it. But I myself am in recovery. I never picked up a drug until I was almost 40 years old. And when I did, I picked up crystal meth. I happen to be an expert. I try to be an expert at everything I do and an overachiever, and crystal meth was the drug. So now 15 years clean. It's kind of interesting to me that our executive director, she and I worked at another nonprofit. She asked me one day if I had ever heard of Victoria's Voice, and I had not. I researched it a little bit, and I went, my God, it just seems like this would be the right place for me to be, to try to help others to not go through what I went through. And quite honestly, I mean, in 2008 Memorial Day weekend, I should have died because I had so much meth in my system. And, when I tell my story, when I'm out in front of groups, I share that I had 2.5 grams of meth in my system. I had been awake for 5 days, and I had 1 gram left, and I put it all into a syringe and shot it all at once. And I should be dead. I think Chris could attest to that. And I passed out and woke up 48 hours later in the exact same position that I was when I passed out. And I got a little bit of water to drink, and I fell asleep again for another 16 hours. So, and then I went into rehab right after that. In fact, when I went into rehab a week and a half later, I was still coming down. I was still detoxing. So, I'm, like I said, I'm very happy to be here at Victoria's Voice and helping to tell my story, to share it with others, and maybe prevent others from picking up. Again, I didn't pick up till I was almost 40.
I mean, it's amazing. You talked about 1 million children reached, and because this is so personal for you to approach this work, can't imagine how that feels to meet those or to achieve benchmarks like that, and in light of what you've gone through.
It really does. It means a lot. I'm on the fundraising side and also on the marketing side, and we put together some tremendous toolkits for parents and for organizations that they can print out. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with the Get Give Save campaign. But I know that it's making a difference, and particularly when we go into the schools. The children are turning over their vapes at the end of the presentation. And In fact, it's making me think that I might want to pull something up and read to you a text that we got from someone. But when they turn into vapes, we have taken some of them and had them tested, and there is synthetic fentanyl in them.
Wow.
So, and in fact, I'll tell you a brief story. In Alabama, a couple of years ago, I think it was the year before last, there were 6 boys that went into the restroom and they shared a vape pen, and they all got fentanyl poisoning. And the coach was called because he had Narcan, he had naloxone. Unfortunately, he only had 5 doses. So one of the children died.
Oh my goodness.
And I can't imagine what that coach, is having to deal with to this day. I don't know how you make a decision, like that. But, as Chris will tell you, once you dispense it, you can't dispense just part of it. When that trigger pushes, it all goes in. So it wasn't like he could share a dose.
Based on these stories you're sharing, these unfortunately tragic stories, but also then the triumphant stories where you're talking about reaching a lot of people, what really makes a big difference, as you said at the top of the show, with Victoria's Voice and the work you do, are the strategic partnerships, making partnerships with the right organizations to increase your reach and make the work you do all the more potent. And I wanted to ask you with Jason then to tell me about how InnovaScript and Victoria's Voice became acquainted, how you linked up, and how this full-on partnership that we now have between the organizations developed.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll have the same story, Mark. So feel free to correct me if if you see it differently. But first, I want to address what Mark shared with us with his story, and just say thank you, Mark, for sharing. I mean, I've gotten the chance to hear your story multiple times now, and it takes a lot of courage and to have the story that you have and to share it for the benefit of all. And I just want to say that it's inspiring. It's miraculous. I'm glad that you're here with us because you are proof, and really the Siegel family are proof that out of tragedy can come some of the most beautiful stories of recovery and rescue. And so, the impact that you all are having now is immeasurable. And I'm just really thankful that you are out there sharing your story and doing this great work. So thank you. But just to address your question, Adam, with regard to how we got connected, from my point of view, the world of pharma is relatively small when you get to a certain level, especially when you distill that down to the number of companies with a story like ours. Really, that list is a list of one of one. So I think that it was a natural connection through some of the folks that Mark and I both network with, who, once they'd heard Victoria's Voice's story and they'd heard Mark's story, they said, we've got to connect these guys. They've got to talk. And so, the partnership with Diamond just made sense. I just to kind of further, expound on that. Diamond is, like I've always said, like an American dream story. We are family owned and operated. Over half a century in business. We've grown by word of mouth, by giving good service to our customers, and out of that, half century, we've grown and developed, divisions and business units that serve, different aspects of the market. And so we have this sort of homegrown, natural, established infrastructure that was born out of the need of our customers, which now gives us a lot of options to be flexible and to be agile and to do creative things in the market. So I think when you put together, our American dream story with the heart and soul of being a family-owned and operated business, with the powerful, powerful story of Victoria's Voice and even Mark's personal story, it's just a match made in heaven. It's a perfect combination for us to go out there, identify the mission, and deliver. And so, I think that if Victoria's Voice is is on a mission to educate. Um, when they partner with InnovaScript, what we enable is accessibility. And so we're really kind of the perfect match for each other. Anyway, with that, I will shut up because I can talk for days on end. And I'll let Mark give his side of that connection story.
No, it's pretty much the same. We just had a mutual business contact who made the introduction, and it just fell into place. And I'm a big believer in the universe making things happen when they're supposed to and bringing things about. And so I'm just grateful that we were able to make the introduction. And Jason doesn't hold against me that I was in the Navy and he's in the Army and all that kind of stuff. So.
That's right. We're still brothers at the end of the day, Mark.
That's right.
Well, thank you both for your service.
Thank you.
What really undergirds the partnership between Innova and Victoria's Voice is the Get, Give, Save campaign, which you mentioned a little bit ago, Mark. It's a national campaign to increase naloxone awareness. And if you go to victoriasvoice.foundation, you scroll down the homepage, you'll see that Get, Give, Save artwork very prominently there. You're also going to see the InnovaScript logo, which links to a new joint website that features naloxone for purchase, among other items. Jason and Mark, again, tell me about the development of this website, the inspiration behind it, and who really do you hope it will serve, and what are your hopes and dreams for this website together?
Jason, I'll let you start.
Oh, okay, awesome. I was going to do you the same courtesy, but I'll be happy to jump in there. So I think that it's important first to acknowledge the fact that it's not just an opinion that fentanyl and the opioid epidemic it's a threat to our entire way of life, to the American dream, to our society. It's eroding the safety of our youth. It's destroying families, and we have to act now to stop the bleeding. And so, acting now is as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of twofold. First of all, you have to educate. You have to let people know what the problem is and how they can be part of the solution. And then the second component there is to create accessibility. So the idea with the website, developing the website, is just simply to plug in the mission and the education, which is so incredibly strong with Victoria's Voice and what they're doing in schools and across the country, and even with their plans for future campaigns to educate and advertise and just get the awareness up. Those are things that point people toward resources. So Victoria's Voice has done a tremendous job at compiling resources and organizing the Get, Give, Save campaign. That's all got to point somewhere. So where I see InnovaScript and the website kind of serving in that ecosystem is that we have the infrastructure and we have the levers we can pull on to consolidate those resources and to provide accessibility to both prescription and non-prescription products, to eventually medical devices and even services that we're connected to because of our experience in healthcare at large. So that's why we've decided to go forward with this, consolidating resources and making sure people have one point of access and entry that they know they can trust, they can turn to, and they have this incredible nonprofit whom they trust, and they trust the story. And what better partner to find to back up the access and to back up that story than family owned and operated business in small town Pennsylvania that's been around for 50 years. Again, I just think that's that's the mission, that's the goal, is to provide the accessibility.
Absolutely. And that's so important that that naloxone is now available over the counter. You don't have to have a prescription for it. And a lot of people don't realize that. Now there is another an 8 milligram dose that does require a prescription, and that's Cloxato. But there's Revive, which is a 3 milligram, and then there's Narcan, which is a 4 milligram dose. And what a lot of law enforcement officers have shared with me is that because the fentanyl is so powerful, and even the synthetic fentanyl, that it's requiring stronger doses. So, we want to educate people, help them understand the efficacy of this product, and to take away the stigma that's associated with it. Get where I was going with this, but someone asked me not too terribly long ago about about giving this out to people, trying to get it into people's hands. The majority of people that die of an opioid overdose do it in front of someone. So, and the majority of them do it in their own home. So it is very, very important that we get this into people's hands, into their homes, into their car, into their purse, because you never know when you might come upon someone that may be overdosing. And the other thing that's really important is that if you give it to someone and they're not having an overdose, you're not going to hurt them. And I'll let Chris can speak more to that. And we're also covered under the Good Samaritan law.
Mark and Jason, you both talked about the importance of education, and here's where I want to bring Chris into the discussion. So, Chris, as part of the initial collaboration between InnovaScript and Victoria's Voice, you were tapped to appear in a television special that was produced for WFTV Channel 9 in Florida, and that was called Hidden in Plain Sight, The Fentanyl Crisis. That originally aired the night before Thanksgiving, and right before we started recording here, Mark had shared that reached 100,000 viewers that night. Which is incredible, and a great debut for you on television as well, Chris. And we're gonna link to that. We're gonna link to that special in the show notes so you can see that. But Chris, you had the opportunity to educate the audience about how naloxone worked. You had a dummy. You administered it. Mm-hmm. You gave that demonstration how to do it in an emergency setting. And even though we've known about naloxone for a while, it's been around a while, and as Mark said, it's now over the counter. Can you reiterate and recap just how powerful, simple, and effective naloxone is at saving lives?
Yeah, and I just want to start by saying what a privilege it was to be tapped to be part of that special. I just thought it was a great way to spread awareness in general, and for whatever my part could have been, I was glad to assist in spreading that message. To recap. Basically, Adam, is naloxone is the gold standard. Mark, you had already mentioned about how important it is to use it in opioid overdose treatment, and obviously this is for many of the reasons that Adam you just alluded to. In an overdose, essentially, just not to get too into the weeds, but in an overdose, too much opioid is essentially occupying the body's opioid receptors, which obviously leads to that decreased or absent breathing, as well as excessive sedation, as well and possibly unresponsiveness that we see to be traditional of an overdose. Now, naloxone is special because it actually has the ability to come in and kick the opioid off of the receptor, thereby reversing the symptoms of an overdose. So that's just to distill it down to the simplest facts about it. But to put it even simpler, naloxone acts fast. We see effects with this medication in as little as 3 minutes after intranasal administration. It's also highly effective. Depending on the report that you're looking at, we see success rates between 75 to 100% success whenever it's been administered by a layperson, and that's not even if it's in the hands of a trained professional. And last and most importantly is that it's so simple. I know that historically, naloxone has been and can be given in many different ways. It can be given in the vein, in the muscle, the skin, and the nose. But what Narcan did was it really revolutionized this process, right? By creating this single dose device. You simply place the device in a nostril, you press the plunger firmly down all the way with your thumb. And as Mark, you had mentioned this before, it automatically gives a full dose. There is no half measures with this. So after you give the dose, a responder calls 911. They can administer CPR if they happen to be trained to do so, and then they can continue giving repeat doses every 2 to 3 minutes if it happens to be needed until paramedics can arrive on the scene. And the last point I was going to make, Mark, you said it perfectly, took the words right out of my mouth. It's very important to highlight the fact that there's no harm associated with administering naloxone. And this is regardless of whether or not they are actually experiencing a true overdose or if they happen to be unresponsive for some other reason. So, as I'd like to tell everybody, and I believe I said this in the special, in situations where an overdose is suspected, there really is no risk, but all potential reward in giving Narcan. So it's kind of a no-brainer in that situation.
When you talk about how just effective and simple naloxone is, unfortunately, there is still a stigma associated with it. And Mark, I wanted to talk to you about this because one key message among many, and when you're talking about naloxone awareness efforts, is to destigmatize it. This, as Chris just got done saying very, very succinctly, life-saving medication, but there's still detractors who see it as encouragement to addiction. And I wanted to ask, what is your response to that?
Well, some of the misconceptions out there, one, as Chris just said, anybody can administer it. And I think there are a lot of people out there that think it has to be a medical professional, but it does not have to be. And it's, again, with Narcan and this nasal spray, I mean, it's very, very simple to administer. Another one is that, people think that it encourages substance misuse. And it was not too terribly long ago that I saw an interview. The director of Health and Human Services was interviewed because they were talking about Narcan becoming available over the counter. And he was asked that question. And certainly not. It does not encourage substance use, but we have a responsibility as human beings to try to save someone's life if we think that they are overdosing. Would we just stand back and say, oh, well, I don't have it? That's just not the right way to go about it. That's just not who we are as human beings. And that it might prevent people from seeking treatment. Chris can attest to this, that, when you administer naloxone or Narcan or any of the others, they instantly start to go through withdrawals. And it's not a pleasant experience. And some of them, aren't real happy about it. But it does get them, in a situation where they can get medical treatment and medical care because they absolutely need to have that within 90 minutes. So, I just, again, going back to the biggest misconception is that it encourages substance misuse. I personally would disagree with that and say, again, we have a responsibility to try to save others' lives. Chris?
Yeah. Well, I actually did want to piggyback off of what you just said, Mark, because what you were saying is, one of the biggest things that you had said there was linkage to care. You said it without necessarily saying it exactly, but it's I go through this with a lot of people. They share the same sentiment, and they're saying you're enabling their use. What's the point? What's the point in enabling them like that? But it's not, the point behind this is not to give it to them essentially just to continue use. It's to revive them and give them the opportunity to have that linkage of care. And once they're linked with care, there's then that opportunity for them to go on and seek treatment. And there's the opportunity for them to succeed and overcome their addiction.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd like to add something to that as well. It's not just people who are, regular drug users or abusers who are exposed to fentanyl. This is a crisis. I mean, look at the number of vapes that you all have tested, Mark, that have come up with trace elements of fentanyl. And these kids they're not choosing to go, sit in a dark alley and put a needle in their arm or smoke out of a pipe. There's exposure happening all over the country that really has nothing to do with enabling, drug abuse. It's a risk factor that exists, completely outside of that in many cases. So I just think that's a really important thing to call out. In the pandemic in 2020, we looked at first responders, nurses, law enforcement officers, firefighters, paramedics. We called them heroes. We looked at them and we said, These are our heroes. Let's honor these people. You know, with the fentanyl and opioid epidemic, there is a chance for every single one of us to be a hero. You know, when we talk about destigmatizing, having naloxone and saving a life in this way, I think there's no reason that every single person shouldn't have naloxone in their glove box, medicine cabinet, workspace, wherever it makes sense. Um, I was actually our first customer on this platform, um, and the ops team, when I placed my order, the ops team over at InnovaScript, they called me immediately, said, "Hey, uh, I'm sure you're just testing things out. We'll go ahead and post a refund to your credit card." And I said, "No." I said, I want my naloxone. I want to have it in my car. I want to have it in my cabinet, because even if I don't think there's anything going on in my own life, I'm not using anything where I feel like I'm exposed to that risk. And to my knowledge, no one in my family is. But that doesn't mean that the person running down the street in front of my house, or the person that I see pulled over on the side of the road having a crisis, that might be my time to put on my Superman cape and get involved and save a life. So I want that opportunity. If I happen to be in that scenario, if the universe or God puts me in that situation, I want to be able to respond and save a life.
Exactly. And I want to share with you a couple of instances where certainly the individuals that were poisoned with the fentanyl were not users. One was down in Palm Beach County, and a family was vacationing, and they checked into their Airbnb, and their little toddler walked over to the coffee table. And of course, toddlers got to touch everything, and rubbed their hand across the coffee table and then put it in their mouth, and was poisoned and died.
Oh my gosh.
Because they did not have naloxone there. Another one where we had a police officer that pulled someone over, and they were exposed to fentanyl, and they required a couple of doses. Fortunately, backup came and administered it to those police to that police officer. So, it's as Jason said, you just never know when it might happen. My husband was on the Brightline train coming back or going down to Miami a couple of days ago, and sitting right across from him was a couple that had partied pretty hardy apparently over the weekend, and they were really, really strung out. Now, they didn't need naloxone, but again, you just don't know the situation that you might find yourself in. Imagine if one of them had gotten up and went to the restroom and had swallowed a pill, or even sitting in front of him had swallowed a pill and there was fentanyl in it. So you just never know. And so there's, an opportunity that we all have. And, I could just imagine that the person upstairs would say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant."
Well, a word that you all mentioned, opportunity. When you talk about that opportunity, naloxone was granted that over-the-counter status March of last year, and it was starting to hit the store shelves later in the year around the autumn. But now that you can find it in more places, of course, that's far from the end of the story, as all these harrowing accounts that you just talked about, Mark, attest to. So, Mark, now, even though anyone can freely buy naloxone now in places that they couldn't before, what barriers still remain to access, and how is Victoria's Voice in particular looking to break through them?
It's a really good question. So price seems to be a barrier for many people. And what I try to share with folks is, it's really good to have it. Let's hope we never have to use it. The same way with a fire extinguisher that you have in your kitchen. You sure as heck hope that you never have to use it. I live in a 2-story house, so I have a fire escape ladder, and I hope I never have to use it, but it's there. It's my insurance. So, that again, the cost barrier seems to be one thing, because people look at it and say, "Well, I'll never." Actually, I will tell you that there was a survey that was done. Yahoo did a survey several months ago, And 90% of the people in that survey said that they were aware of naloxone, but they would never purchase it because they didn't think they would ever have to use it. So we really, through our education, have to make people aware that it's just like insurance on your car. It's just an insurance policy. And I don't necessarily think that people are, going to the grocery store or whatever and thinking, oh, let me put naloxone on my shopping list.
Exactly.
So when we get them when we get them to the getgivesave.org website or Victoria's Voice website, and they get engaged with the movement, and they get the tools and posters and all kinds of information, then they can order it right then and there while it's top of mind. It's very easy. It gets sent to their home. And, that is why one of the main reasons that we joined with InnovaScript and Diamond is because as I go out and talk to folks, they're like, where can I get it? I don't know where to get it. Well, I don't know if it's available in their corner grocery store, but I do know where it is available, and that's on getgivesave.org through InnovaScript.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Mark really hit the nail on the head there with, I was going to bring up the point, but he did. Most people aren't adding naloxone to their grocery shopping list. And unfortunately, while we still combat the stigma, there are a lot of folks that may feel uncomfortable going in and adding something, and checking out in their local store because they might think that it implies something about them having a problem or a family member having a problem, which of course it doesn't, as we've talked about. But while that stigma still persists, there's a real easy solution, and that is have it, discreetly delivered to your door so that you can stash your Superman cape in your car, in your cabinet, wherever you need to, and not worry about that in the interim. And the other thing that I think is important to call out is, that supply chain. If anything, we learned anything in the last 3 or 4 years, whether it comes to computer chips for making cars or medical supplies and masks and PPE during COVID. Supply chain is not always to be trusted. It's not incredibly stable through crises and through world events. And I do think it's important that we not just rely on the fact that when we decide that we think we might need to have this on hand, which by the way, I believe it's got a 2-year shelf life. So if you go ahead and get it and have it delivered to your home, you can kind of check that box in your mind for a couple of years. But if you wait around until the sign to go to the store and pick it up, there's no guarantee that it'll be on the shelf. So, I hope that it is. I hope that it's readily available. I hope that, these barriers to people having it are dissolved. But we have to understand that the best way for us to stand up and engage is to create that easy path for people to order online in the moment that they understand the mission and to have that delivered discreetly to their home right away.
And just real quick, that's a 3-year shelf life on naloxone, just to clarify.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Even better.
Yeah. They actually just extended that shelf life, I believe, a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, cool. Awesome. See, hey, I'm learning something new every day, guys.
Well, and we're starting to approach the end of our time here. So I wanted to wrap up with to ask Jason and Mark, I wanted to ask you both, besides just the website, which is providing all this wonderful access to naloxone, as far as the overall partnership between Victoria's Voice and InnovaScript Diamond, what are your ultimate hopes and goals for this partnership aside from just the website? What do you hope to achieve together going forward?
Well, on my end, I would say that our goal is to get naloxone into every medicine cabinet, into every first aid kit. In fact, I just heard that in California, there is a legislator that has introduced a bill to require it in every first aid kit in a business. So maybe that will catch on and then catch on across the country. But that is our goal, is to get naloxone into every household and in every purse and every place of business so that we can save lives.
Jason?
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Mark. Simply For me, as simple as this may sound, my hope is to save a single life. If it does that, if this partnership does that, then every bit of effort and every bit of investment that we all have put into this is worth it. Looking beyond that, my hope is that we can continue to kind of, refine that central access point to arm every single citizen and neighbor in this country with a way to combat this, frankly, diabolical enemy, which has infected this country. I feel very strongly about it, and I'm trying to, remain professional, but with my affiliation with, with the Army and everything. I mean, I look at the motives of those who want to push this into the country to kind of enable us sort of rotting from the core, and it makes my blood boil. Because there are other rivals out there in the world who are loving watching what's happening to us in the midst of this crisis. So for me, the hope and is to save a life, to educate, to have people have access to feel empowered to take up the fight and save lives. And then, long term, I want to make sure we integrate many more resources, products, services, all the things that will help support the mission. It's very exciting and rewarding work, and I'm just really thankful to be part of it.
I want to piggyback on something real quick that you mentioned. Last week, I had dinner with some of the executives with the DEA, and I asked two questions. Why is it that drug dealers are putting fentanyl in the drugs and killing their customers? And he said, that's the number one question that they get asked. And what the DEA said is that the drug dealers are not trying to kill their customers. They are trying to get them hooked on fentanyl. But if 100,000 people die in the process, there's another 100,000 people that are waiting to pick up. And then China, on their end, they say that, look, the problem isn't with them. It's America's insatiable appetite for fentanyl. So I just wanted to add that in. I thought that was rather interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it just underscores the importance of the partnership that InnovaScript and Victoria's Voice have. And Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for being our first guest outside of Diamond, but more importantly, thank you for all the work that you're doing with Victoria's Voice. Thank you for sharing your very personal story, your connection to why you do what you do. And we're just very grateful for the example that you're setting, that Victoria's Voice is setting. And also, Jason Baker, thank you for everything you're doing on the strategic end with Diamond to make partnerships like this happen. It's clearly a very personal crusade for you as well, and I'm sure it feels really good to see all this happening. And of course, Chris Bender, you're always such a great knowledge resource, bringing the pharmacist and the pharmacist perspective in on this. And look forward to you possibly doing more work like you did on that TV special, and also get to lend your expertise that way. So yeah, the three of you are just such great resources to talk about this issue. We could talk so much more, but obviously we're at the end of our time. So thank you all again, and I hope we'll get to talk again soon.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank
you for all that you do.
Thanks,
for
Adam.
All of us as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for bringing us all together.
Of course. All right. Have a great day, gentlemen.
PodcastRx features conversations with healthcare professionals. The statements and opinions discussed herein are for informational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered professional medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for the advice of an appropriately qualified and licensed healthcare professional. Therefore, listeners must not rely on the statements made herein. But we do hope you enjoyed them.
PodcastRx is a production of Diamond Pharmacy Services, the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. Keep up with our show on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. New episodes usually drop the first full week of each month. Where possible, please rate and review the show to help us reach more listeners. If you have any questions or feedback for PodcastRx, we'd love to hear it. Shoot us an email at podcastrx@diamondpharmacy.com. We thank you again for listening.